Welcome to Inner Reflections, a quiet space from beyond words and places. Wherever this episode finds you, walking, traveling, or simply taking a moment away from the noise, I invite you to slow down with me. There is nothing to achieve here, only something to notice. The Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung left us with these words: "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." What if the greatest prison isn't built from stone, but from thoughts we have never questioned? What if the walls that confine you are not made of brick and mortar, but of assumptions so deeply embedded in your mind that you have mistaken them for reality itself? Consider this for a moment. What if the limitations you feel most acutely, the ceilings on your ambition, the boundaries on your potential, the invisible lines you dare not cross, are not imposed by the external world at all? They are imposed by you, and you have forgotten that you are the one who drew them. Perhaps, somewhere along the path of becoming who you are, you stopped asking a simple question: are these walls real or merely inherited? What if you could see them for what they are? And in that seeing, perhaps you could finally move beyond them. Imagine for a moment that every human being is born into an invisible house. Long before you become aware of it, that house is already under construction. Its foundations are laid in infancy. Its walls rise in childhood. Its rooms are furnished by the voices, expectations, and experiences of those who came before you. Every room is shaped by something. Your parents, their fears, their hopes, their unfulfilled dreams, their quiet compromises, and the patterns of thinking they inherited themselves. Your school, the lessons it taught about what matters, what success looks like, what intelligence means, and what you should aspire to become. Your culture, the unspoken rules about how to live, what to value, who to be, what defines a good life, and what counts as failure. Your religion, or its absence, and the framework it offered for meaning, purpose, morality, and belonging. Your society's definition of success, wealth, status, achievement, productivity, visibility, and the quiet pressure to measure your life against those ideals. Your family's experience of failure, the warnings they passed down, the paths they discouraged, and the dreams they quietly abandoned. And perhaps most influential of all, the expectations of those you love, the subtle currents of approval and disappointment that have shaped your choices more than you may realize. Over time, as you live within this house, its architecture becomes invisible. The walls fade from view. The furniture becomes part of the background. Eventually, the entire structure feels less like something that was built and more like reality itself. This is how things are. This is how life works. This is who you are. But here is the question that changes everything. Did you build this house, or did you simply inherit it? Think of the traveler who grows up in one country, surrounded by one culture, one language, and one way of understanding the world. They naturally assume that their way of life is universal, normal, inevitable. Then they travel. They encounter a different culture, a different set of assumptions, a different way of organizing life and making meaning. And suddenly, they realize something profound. The way they had always lived was only one possibility, one arrangement among many, one way of being human among countless others. Perhaps the mind works in much the same way. Perhaps the architecture of our inner world, our beliefs about ourselves, our assumptions about others, and our expectations of how life should unfold is not universal truth. It is only one interpretation, one way of seeing the world that we have rarely stopped to question. Invisible walls rarely feel like walls. They simply feel normal. They feel like the way things are supposed to be. They feel like common sense. They feel like reality itself. That is precisely why they are so difficult to see, and that is precisely why they hold such power over us. Because the most confining prison is not the one you are forced to inhabit. It is the one you have quietly accepted, the one you never realized was there. To understand how these invisible structures operate, we turn to the work of Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who devoted his life to exploring the hidden architecture of the human psyche. Jung recognized something that many of his contemporaries overlooked. We are not the masters of our own minds. Beneath conscious awareness lies an entire world of influences, assumptions, patterns, and compulsions that quietly shape our lives without our knowledge or our consent. As Jung observed, we are governed by forces we cannot see. Until we learn to recognize them, they will continue to direct us. We will continue to believe we are free, when, in truth, we are following invisible scripts. Jung identified several key structures within this hidden architecture, patterns that shape our sense of self, our relationships, our work, and the way we experience the world. The first is what he called the persona. The persona is the mask we wear before the world. It is the identity we present to others, the role we perform, the face we show to society. It is shaped by expectations, what others want from us, what we believe is acceptable, and what we think will earn us love, approval, and belonging. The persona is not inherently harmful. It allows us to function in society, navigate relationships, and fulfill our responsibilities. The difficulty begins when we mistake the mask for the person wearing it, when we forget it is a role rather than who we truly are, when we become so identified with our performance that we lose contact with the deeper self behind the mask. How many of us have mistaken our career for our identity? How many have confused our social persona with our authentic self? How many have forgotten that the person we present to the world is not the same person we are when no one is watching? The second structure Jung explored is the shadow. The shadow contains everything we have rejected, denied, or repressed about ourselves. Our anger, our jealousy, our fear, our desire, our shame, our selfishness, our vulnerability. We push these parts of ourselves into the darkness of the unconscious, hoping they will quietly disappear. But they never do. They remain. They gather strength in the darkness. Eventually, they begin to influence us in ways we cannot understand or control. The shadow often reveals itself through projection. As Jung observed, we do not simply see the world. We see ourselves reflected in it. Projection is the process of attributing our own unconscious qualities to other people. The anger we cannot acknowledge becomes that angry person over there. The selfishness we refuse to recognize becomes that selfish person we resent. The fear we cannot face becomes that threatening situation we must avoid. In our relationships, we project unmet needs, unacknowledged desires, hidden strengths, and disowned weaknesses onto partners, friends, colleagues, even enemies. We are often drawn to people who embody qualities we have not yet recognized within ourselves, and we often react most strongly to qualities we have not yet accepted in ourselves. Every strong emotional reaction is a mirror. Every judgment we make about another person contains a hidden message about ourselves. Consider your relationships. Consider your conflicts. Consider the people who trigger you most deeply. What might they be revealing about you? What parts of yourself have you quietly placed in someone else? What would it be like to reclaim those projections? What would it be like to recognize within yourself what you have spent so long seeing only in others? Jung also recognized that we are shaped by collective patterns, what he called archetypes. These are inherited structures of the human psyche, patterns of perception and behavior found across cultures and across time. The mother, the father, the hero, the wise old man, the trickster, the lover, the warrior. These archetypes shape our stories, our expectations, and our understanding of ourselves and others. They influence how we see our parents, how we approach our work, how we imagine our future, and how we understand our place in the world. Most of the time, we remain unaware of their influence. We believe we are making choices, when in reality, we are often following scripts that are thousands of years old. We believe we are being original, when in reality, we are playing roles that have existed since the dawn of human consciousness. So Jung leaves us with a series of questions. Which parts of yourself have you mistaken for your whole identity? Which masks have you worn for so long that they now feel like skin? Which aspects of yourself have you projected onto others, avoiding the difficult work of recognizing them within yourself? Which unconscious patterns are quietly directing your life while you believe you are making conscious choices? This is the work of becoming conscious. It is not easy. It is often uncomfortable, but it is the only path towards genuine freedom. If Jung reveals the architecture of the invisible walls, the patterns, projections, and personas that shape our experience without our awareness, Epictetus asks a very different question. A question that cuts through the complexity with remarkable simplicity. Which walls actually exist, and which exist only in our minds? Epictetus was a philosopher of the Stoic tradition. He was born into slavery, he lived in poverty. Yet he developed a philosophy of profound freedom, a freedom that had nothing to do with external circumstances. For Epictetus, freedom begins with a single distinction: what belongs to us and what never did. The distinction is simple, but it is revolutionary. Some things are within our control. Many things are not. Within our control are our judgments, our choices, our reactions, our values, our intentions, and our efforts. Beyond our control are our health, our reputation, our wealth, our success, our relationships, our circumstances, the behavior of other people, and the events of the world. The freedom Epictetus offers is not the freedom to control the world. It is the freedom to see it clearly. It is the freedom to recognize the limits of our power and to choose our response within those limits. It is the freedom to stop arguing with reality and begin working with it. Consider someone stuck in traffic. They can become angry, frustrated, anxious, resentful. They can resist the situation, wishing it were different. But that resistance creates a prison of its own, a cage of frustration that has nothing to do with the traffic itself. Or they can accept the situation, recognize that it is beyond their control, and choose a different response. Listening to a podcast, enjoying the music, taking a slow breath, simply being present. The prison was never the traffic. The prison was the resistance. The same is true of criticism. The criticism may hurt, but whether it defines us is another matter entirely. The same is true of failure. Failure is an event. Being defined by it is a choice. The greatest prison is rarely circumstance. It is resistance. The refusal to accept what is. The endless argument with reality. The exhausting attempt to control what cannot be controlled. And here is Epictetus's liberating insight. The door was never locked. You have always been free to choose your response. You have always been free to change your relationship with what happens. You have always been free to accept what cannot be changed and work with it rather than against it. This is not passive resignation. It is active engagement. It is recognizing the limits of our power then using that power where it truly belongs. Freedom is not the absence of constraints. Freedom is choosing how we relate to them. Jung shows us the walls we have built. Epictetus shows us the door we have never tried. Where in your life are you still arguing with reality? Where are you exhausting yourself resisting what cannot be changed? Where have you mistaken circumstance for imprisonment? What would happen if you stopped fighting reality and began working with it? What if the door was never locked? The third thinker in our exploration offers another perspective. Jung reveals the psychological walls within. Epictetus reveals the philosophical walls we mistake for reality. But Erich Fromm asks something even more unsettling. What if the greatest wall is not imposed upon us, from without or within? What if it is something we quietly build ourselves, because living without it feels frightening? Fromm was a psychoanalyst and social philosopher whose book, Escape from Freedom, explores a paradox that remains just as relevant today. Many people do not fear imprisonment, they fear freedom. Why? Because freedom carries responsibility. It requires choice. It asks us to define ourselves, to make decisions, to accept responsibility for our own lives. And that is terrifying. It is often easier to let other people decide, to follow the path laid out by society, family, culture, or tradition, to accept the roles we inherit rather than creating our own, to stay busy enough that we never have to meet ourselves in the silence. Fromm believed that modern society often helps us escape freedom rather than embrace it. We are surrounded by comfort, ready-made identities, ready-made opinions, ready-made ambitions. We are encouraged to consume rather than create, to conform rather than question, to fit in rather than become ourselves. And we accept those invitations surprisingly willingly. Because freedom is difficult. Freedom requires courage. Freedom means accepting that no one else is coming to live our life for us. Look around today. Our phones fill every empty moment. Our attention is constantly pulled elsewhere. We compare ourselves with carefully curated lives. We consume endless advice about how to think, how to live, how to succeed. We fill every quiet space with noise. We rarely stop. We rarely pause. We rarely ask, what do I actually believe? What do I truly value? Because if we did, we might discover we don't know. We might discover that much of our life has been built from someone else's script. Fromm would recognize this immediately. We escape into distraction, consumption, busyness, and conformity because the alternative feels frightening. Facing ourselves, making our own choices, accepting responsibility for our own lives. Think about careers, relationships, identity, social media. In each of these areas, how often are we living from conviction rather than expectation? The invisible wall today may not be oppression. It may be distraction. It may be relentless noise. It may be constant stimulation. It may be the comfortable prison we build because authenticity feels uncertain. Fromm leaves us with 3 questions. If every moment is filled, when do we hear ourselves? If we never pause, how do we know what we truly believe? And if we spend our lives responding to everyone else's expectations, whose life are we actually living? The fear of freedom is real. It is understandable, but it is still a cage. A cage we have quietly built, and one we can quietly unlock. What would it mean to stop escaping? To become still enough to hear your own voice? To accept the extraordinary freedom of becoming fully yourself? We have explored 3 different kinds of walls. Jung revealed the psychological architecture, the invisible structures of persona, shadow, projection, and inherited patterns that quietly shape our lives. Epictetus revealed the philosophical walls, the limits we mistake for prisons, the resistance that creates so much of our suffering, and the freedom that begins when we choose our response. Fromm revealed the social walls, the comfortable prisons of distraction, conformity, and busyness that we build because freedom can feel frightening. 3 thinkers, 3 perspectives, 1 enduring question. What if the greatest limitations in our lives are not the ones we can see, but the ones we have quietly accepted? Jung reminds us, become conscious. Epictetus reminds us, choose your response. Fromm reminds us, have the courage to become yourself. Each points towards the same destination: awareness, choice, authenticity, freedom. Awareness is where everything begins. We learn to notice the walls that have remained invisible for so long, the patterns, the assumptions, the stories, the scripts that have quietly shaped our lives. This is not easy. It asks us to question what we have always taken for granted. It asks us to face parts of ourselves we would rather avoid. But awareness is also liberating, because once we see the wall, it begins to lose its power. Once we recognize the pattern, we can choose differently. Once we understand the script, we are free to write another. Choice comes next. Once we see the walls, we can decide what to do with them. Some walls will remain. Some limits are real. Some constraints are simply part of being human. But many are not. Many exist only in habit, in assumption, in inherited ways of seeing the world. Those can be unlearned. We can choose which walls to honor and which to dismantle, which patterns still serve us and which no longer do, which stories deserve another chapter and which can finally come to an end. Then comes authenticity, not the persona we present to the world, not the version of ourselves that seeks approval, not the identity that has been handed to us, but the quieter self beneath the mask, the self that has been waiting patiently, the self that already knows what it values, what it believes, what it longs for, the self that is no longer afraid to become fully itself. This is the freedom that Jung, Epictetus, and Fromm all point towards. Not freedom from every constraint, but freedom within them. The freedom to see clearly, to choose deliberately, and to live truthfully. To become who we truly are, rather than who we have been told to be. And it begins with one quiet practice. Not changing, not fixing, not improving. Simply noticing. I would like to leave you with something simple. Tomorrow, as you move through your day, notice. Notice one assumption, one belief you have accepted without ever examining it, one idea about yourself or someone else that has quietly become unquestioned truth. Notice one reaction, a familiar irritation, a recurring fear, a moment when you respond automatically without asking whether another response might be possible. Notice one expectation, a moment when reality fails to match the picture you were carrying in your mind. Then resist the urge to change it. Don't judge it. Don't fix it. Simply observe. Notice, and allow the act of noticing to become the beginning of something new. Because freedom begins with awareness. It begins by seeing what has always been there. It begins by noticing the walls we have never questioned. And from that moment onward, we discover that we are always free to choose differently. We return now to the words of Carl Jung. Until you make the unconscious conscious, It will direct your life, and you will call it fate. When we first heard those words, they may have seemed abstract, distant, perhaps even a little unsettling. I hope they sound different now. Perhaps now we can recognize the patterns Jung described, the personas we wear, the shadows we hide, the projections that quietly shape our relationships, the inherited assumptions that have become the architecture of our lives. These patterns are not fate. They are patterns. Patterns that can be seen. Patterns that can be questioned. Patterns that can change. The invisible walls are not permanent. They are habits of mind. And habits can be unlearned. We return to the image of the house we never chose. Perhaps that house is still standing. Perhaps the walls remain. But perhaps we see them differently now. Perhaps we recognize them as something constructed rather than something permanent. Perhaps we understand them as inherited rather than inevitable. Perhaps we realize that the door was there all along. Perhaps the walls never disappeared. Perhaps we simply discovered the doorway. And perhaps that is enough. Perhaps that is everything. Because freedom rarely begins by changing the world. It begins by seeing the invisible structures through which we have been looking at it. It begins by recognizing that the walls we believed were permanent were never as fixed as they seemed. It begins by noticing the assumptions we have never questioned and asking 3 quiet questions. Is this true? Is this real? Is this truly who I am? Then we take a slow breath and allow ourselves to imagine another possibility. A different room, a different house, a different way of being in the world. That is the promise of inner freedom. Not the freedom to control everything, not the freedom to escape every limitation, but the freedom to see clearly, to choose deliberately, and to become more fully ourselves. The freedom to recognize that the greatest prison is the one we never question, and the freedom to question it. Until our next inner reflection, carry just one question with you. Which invisible wall appeared today? You don't need to tear it down. You don't need to fix it. You don't need to escape it. Simply notice it. Simply see it. Simply acknowledge that it is there. Sometimes awareness is the first act of freedom. Sometimes noticing is the beginning of change. And sometimes the quietest moment of recognition becomes the most powerful act of liberation. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. And thank you for choosing, if only for a little while, to slow down and notice. Until next time, be well, be present, be free.